Imagine walking the crowded streets of New York in the early 1900s. Irish immigrants, fresh off the boats, packed into tenements and worked brutal shifts in factories, docks, and railroads. They carried with them potatoes, cabbage, stout beer, and a tradition of stretching scraps into feasts. In cramped kitchens and bustling pubs, they invented sandwiches so hearty, so outrageous, that they became survival wrapped in bread. Today, almost all of them are forgotten, but by the end of this journey, you'll be shocked at how these flavors once defined an entire community. 1. The corned beef and cabbage roll, St. Patrick's Day in your hands. Corned beef and cabbage was the dish that came to symbolize Irish-American identity. But delis and pubs once transformed it into a sandwich, thick corned beef slices stacked inside a crusty roll, layered with buttery cabbage leaves, mustard, and even a splash of vinegar for bite. The result was juicy, salty, and bold, like holding St. Patrick's Day in your hands. Workers lined up outside pubs to grab one before night shifts, the smell of boiled beef and cabbage following them down the street. Today, it's all but vanished. But if you think that's filling, the next sandwich piled Ireland's most famous ingredient into something even wilder. 2. The boxty breakfast sandwich. Potato pancakes reinvented boxty, crispy potato pancakes, was a humble Irish staple. In America, creative cooks used them instead of bread, pressing sausages, fried eggs, and onions between two golden boxty rounds. The boxty breakfast sandwich was crispy outside, tender inside, and packed with smoky, salty flavors. Imagine biting into layers of sizzling sausage with yolk dripping down, the potatoes soaking it all up. It was breakfast, lunch, and survival food all in one. But as diners and fast food breakfasts took over, this hearty invention disappeared. Still, compared to what's next, even a potato pancake sandwich seems tame, because the following creation involved beef, bread, and beer in one unforgettable bite. 3. The Guinness beef stew. Sandwich, beer meets bread. Irish pubs weren't just about drinking, they were about eating. Some turned their famous Guinness braised beef stew into a handheld miracle. Hunks of tender beef soaked in stout gravy, packed into thick rolls that dripped with sauce. The Guinness beef stew sandwich was messy, rich, and utterly addictive. Pubs served them wrapped in paper, the bread acting as both plate and sponge for the dark, malty gravy. Customers claimed it was the taste of Ireland and America colliding in one bite. But if you think a stew sandwich sounds extreme, wait until you see the next creation, because it turned the simplest potato into a street legend. 4. The fried potato and onion stack, a poor man's feast. When wages barely covered rent, Irish workers turned to what they knew best, potatoes. In smoky kitchens, sliced potatoes and onions were fried together in dripping fat until golden, then stuffed between thick bread slices. The fried potato and onion stack wasn't just food. It was survival disguised as comfort. Each bite was crispy, salty, and sweet from caramelized onions. Workers said it kept them going through 12-hour shifts in factories. It was cheap, filling, and strangely addictive. But as prosperity grew and diets shifted, this sandwich vanished, remembered only by those who knew hunger. Yet, the next creation wasn't about poverty. It was about turning humble mash into melted indulgence. 5. The Colcannon melt. Ireland's soul in a sandwich called cannon, mashed potatoes blended with buttered cabbage, was a dish tied to Irish hearths. In America, immigrants layered this creamy mix into sandwiches, topping it with sharp Irish cheddar and toasting it until golden. The Colcannon melt oozed butter and cheese, the cabbage giving it bite, the bread crisping around the edges. It was gooey, heavy, and comforting, a sandwich that tasted like family and faith. Mothers packed them for dock workers, the warmth lingering long after the food was gone. But as convenience meals spread, Colcannon faded into folklore, And compared to what's next, even molten cheese and potatoes couldn't match the punch of real Irish bacon. 6. The Irish bacon and brown bread, a taste of home. Unlike American bacon, Irish bacon was thick, meaty, and less salty, more like ham. Layered on dense brown soda bread with butter and sometimes mustard, it became the Irish bacon and brown bread sandwich. Simple but deeply satisfying, it reminded immigrants of breakfasts back home, of mornings on farms where bacon was king. In the pubs of New York, this sandwich was a quiet favorite, eaten with a pint of stout. But as soda bread baking declined in immigrant kitchens, this sandwich all but disappeared. And yet, the next creation proved that nostalgia wasn't enough, because it dared to turn a national dish into a handheld rebellion. 7. The shepherd's pie. Sandwich, a casserole you could hold. Shepherd's pie was never meant to be portable, but Irish-American cooks in crowded tenements reimagined it as a sandwich, layers of ground beef or lamb, peas, carrots, and thick mashed potatoes pressed between crusty bread. The shepherd's pie sandwich was messy, hearty, and filling enough to feed 2 men at once. The bread soaked up the rich gravy, turning each bite into a handheld feast. Workers swore it tasted like Ireland itself, but easier to eat on the go. Over time, it became a nostalgic memory, replaced by cheaper, faster foods. Still, compared to what's next, even mashed potatoes and bread seem ordinary, because Dublin streets produced something even wilder. 8. The Dublin Coddle. Hero, stew in a loaf Dublin coddle, a stew of sausages, potatoes, and onions, was another dish that jumped into sandwich form in America. Vendors piled the stew's contents into long hero rolls, creating the Dublin Coddle Hero, dripping with broth and bursting with smoky sausage. It was greasy, indulgent, and deeply comforting, especially after long nights of drinking. Some said it was the ultimate hangover cure. Others called it a meal and a pint in one bite. But its heaviness eventually doomed it, and diners traded it for lighter fare. Yet, the next sandwich proved not all Irish-American creations were heavy. Some captured elegance and simplicity straight from the sea. 9. The salmon and soda bread sandwich, coastal luxury. Back in Ireland, salmon was a delicacy tied to rivers and coasts. In America, it became a luxury for Irish immigrants who wanted a taste of home. They layered smoked salmon with butter and chives on soda bread, creating the salmon and soda bread sandwich. It was fresh, fragrant, and elegant, far from the poverty meals many associated with the Irish. For a time, it was a favorite at festive gatherings, paired with stout or whiskey. But as salmon became expensive and soda bread less common, this sandwich disappeared into history. And yet, what comes next dives back into grit and hunger, because the following creation was all about survival in its darkest form. 10. The black pudding and egg roll, the workers' powerhouse. In Ireland, black pudding, made from blood, oats, and spices, was breakfast fuel. Irish immigrants in America stuffed it into rolls with fried eggs, creating the black pudding and egg roll. Heavy, rich, and deeply savory, it gave workers the strength to face brutal factory shifts. The sandwich smelled smoky and spiced, with egg yolks seeping into the bread. For decades, it was the morning ritual of dock workers and miners. But as tastes shifted away from rough foods, black pudding faded into obscurity. And yet, its pale cousin was waiting to take the stage in the next forgotten creation. 11. The white pudding and mustard rye, subtle but bold. White pudding, made with oats fat and spices but no blood, had a milder taste than black pudding. In America, delis served it sliced and layered on rye bread with spicy mustard, birthing the white pudding and mustard rye. It was softer, gentler, but the mustard gave it a punch that kept it from being bland. Families packed it for picnics, and pubs sold it late at night to drinkers looking for a cheap bite. It was the lighter sibling of black pudding, but just as tied to Irish identity. Eventually, though, it disappeared, eclipsed by more glamorous meats. The next sandwich, however, was pure mischief, so simple and strange that it became legendary. Number 12. The potato crisp sandwich, Ireland's crunch in bread. Sometimes genius is simple. Irish kids once stuffed potato crisps, chips into buttered bread, making the potato crisp sandwich. It was crunchy, salty, and addictive, a cheap snack that felt like a treat. In Irish-American neighborhoods, it became a guilty pleasure, sold in corner stores and packed by mothers who had nothing else to give. The crunch echoed childhood, a reminder that joy could come from scraps. But as snacks became commercialized, the humble crisp sandwich faded away. And if you think chips and bread sound strange, wait until you see the next creation, because it mashed tradition and creativity into a handheld feast. 13. The corned beef hashwich, breakfast meets lunch. Corned beef hash was the go-to breakfast for Irish Americans, chopped beef, potatoes, and onions fried until crispy. But in the 1920s, diners turned it into a sandwich, the corned beef hashwich. Imagine thick spoonfuls of sizzling hash piled on toasted bread, yolk from a fried egg dripping over the edges, the crunch of potatoes mixing with salty beef. It was breakfast and lunch fused together, hearty enough to last a whole day. But as hash slipped from menus, so did the hashwich, leaving behind only whispers of a meal that was both comfort and survival. And yet, the next creation wasn't about scraps. It was about luxury flavors transformed into portable indulgence. 14. The lamb and mint butter sandwich, pastures between bread. In Ireland, lamb with mint sauce was a celebratory meal. Irish immigrants in America recreated it with what they had: tender roasted lamb spread with mint-flavored butter, pressed between crusty rolls. The lamb and mint butter sandwich was juicy, aromatic, and refined, a taste of rolling green fields inside a crowded city tenement. It became a wedding favorite, often prepared for family gatherings. But as lamb grew expensive and mint butter became rare, this elegant sandwich faded. Still, compared to what's next, even lamb feels tame, because the following creation mixed the sea potatoes and bread into one bold bite. 15. The fried herring and potato bread sandwich. From the coast to the city, herring was cheap and plentiful on Irish coasts, and immigrants brought the taste with them. In America, they fried herring fillets and tucked them into slices of potato bread with onions and vinegar for tang. The fried herring and potato bread sandwich was crispy, briny, and satisfying, perfect for workers who missed the smell of the sea. Street vendors near docks sold them wrapped in newspaper, the scent of fried fish filling the air. But as diets Americanized, herring lost its place. This sandwich, once a dockside staple, vanished almost completely. And yet, the next creation added fire, literally, thanks to whiskey. 16. The whiskey-glazed ham sandwich. A spirited bite, Irish celebrations often featured ham roasted with whiskey and honey. In America, pubs turned those leftovers into the whiskey-glazed ham sandwich. Thick slabs of smoky ham, lacquered in sweet whiskey glaze, were layered into soft bread with mustard or pickles. Each bite carried the warmth of oak and sweetness of honey, balanced by sharp condiments. It was festive food in a humble package, a reminder of home and holidays, even in cramped city streets. But as whiskey-glazed meats became rare, this sandwich faded into memory. And yet, the next creation was bolder still, pulling oysters from the sea and stout from the tap. 17. The oyster and stout roll, the pub's secret weapon. In 19th century Ireland, oysters were cheap, sometimes cheaper than meat. Irish Americans brought the pairing of oysters and stout beer to the New World, where pubs stuffed fried oysters into rolls slathered with a stout-based gravy. The oyster and stout roll was briny, crunchy, and dark with malty richness. It was messy, indulgent, and unforgettable. Washed down, of course, with a pint of Guinness. Dock workers swore it gave them strength for backbreaking shifts, while revelers claimed it was the best midnight snack. But oyster prices rose, and this pub treasure vanished. Still, the next sandwich showed Irish creativity could be sweet as well as savory. 18. The Irish cheddar and apple sandwich. Sharp meat sweetened Irish farms. Sharp cheddar cheese and crisp apples were a natural pairing. Immigrants brought that memory to America, pressing slices of strong Irish cheddar and tart apple between brown bread with a touch of butter. The Irish cheddar and apple sandwich was a balance of sharp, sweet, and creamy. Simple but surprisingly elegant. Families packed them for picnics in city parks, the taste a link to the orchards back home. But as processed cheese replaced farmhouse cheddar, this sandwich slipped into nostalgia. And compared to what comes next, even apples and cheese feel ordinary, because the following invention fried tradition itself into golden croquettes of indulgence. 19. The Colcannon croquette sandwich, crispy comfort colcannon, mashed potatoes with cabbage, was already an Irish classic. But in New York tenements, resourceful cooks deep-fried scoops of colcannon into golden croquettes, then tucked them into bread rolls with butter and herbs. The colcannon croquette sandwich was crunchy outside, soft and creamy inside, every bite bursting with comfort. It was cheap, filling, and cheerful, an immigrant's answer to fast food before fast food even existed. Kids adored it, adults relied on it, and pubs served it late at night to soak up the stout. But over time, croquettes lost their place at the table, and this sandwich slipped away. Still, the next creation went even bigger, frying an entire meal into a sandwich that shook the streets. 20. The fish and chip buddy, fry shop glory. Fish and chips weren't just dinner, they were a national pride. Irish immigrants in America recreated it by shoving crispy fried fish and thick potato chips into soft rolls, slathered with vinegar and tartar sauce. The fish and chip buddy was greasy, messy, and glorious, steam fogging up windows of fry shops, the crunch echoing down streets. It was the sandwich of workers spilling out of pubs, eaten standing with one hand while the other held a pint. But as fast food chains stole the spotlight, the buddy became a nostalgic whisper. Yet, the next creation brought pub food into bread in a way that felt almost too heavy to be real. 21. The beef and ale pie sandwich. Pub fare reinvented in Irish pubs, beef and ale pies were the definition of hearty fare. But in immigrant neighborhoods, cooks sometimes cracked open the pastry, scooped the filling into bread, and created the beef and ale pie sandwich. Rich beef stew, thick gravy, and onions poured between crusty bread slices, dripping down the eater's hands. It was indulgence, chaos, and comfort all in one. For factory workers, it was the ultimate lunch, a pocket-sized feast that fueled long shifts. But practicality doomed it, too messy, too heavy, and it disappeared into folklore. And yet, compared to what's next, even beef stew and bread couldn't compete with the breakfast sandwich that packed an entire farm into one bite. 22. The soda farls. Breakfast sandwich, morning fuel soda farls, griddle-baked soda bread cut into quarters, were an Irish breakfast essential. In America, immigrants split them open, filled them with rashers of bacon, fried eggs, and sometimes even black pudding. The soda farls breakfast sandwich was smoky, eggy, and buttery, eaten with steaming mugs of tea before long days of labor. For many families, it was the only luxury they could afford in the morning. Over time, soda farls disappeared from immigrant kitchens, and with them, this powerhouse of a sandwich. But the next creation proved even the humblest vegetables could become something extraordinary. 23. The carrot and parsnip mash sandwich, roots of resilience. Carrots and parsnips were humble, hardy vegetables that fed generations through famine. In New York, Irish mothers mashed them with butter and tucked them into sandwiches for their children. The carrot and parsnip mash sandwich was earthy, sweet, and creamy, a small comfort during hard times. Kids carried them to school, embarrassed by the simplicity. But years later, they remembered them with nostalgia. As prosperity grew, this sandwich disappeared, but its memory lingered as a symbol of resilience. And yet, the next creation had none of that modesty. It was smoky, spicy, and born of the streets. 24. The cabbage and sausage street witch, smoke on the corner. In Irish neighborhoods, the smell of fried cabbage and sizzling sausage drifted through the streets. Vendors stuffed them into long rolls with mustard and onions, creating the cabbage and sausage street witch. It was bold, greasy, and perfect for eating while standing on a busy corner, pint in hand. For decades, it fueled dock workers, factory hands, and late-night revelers. But as cities changed, the street witch vanished, replaced by hot dogs and burgers. Still, compared to what's next, even smoky sausages couldn't compete with the sweet and boozy finale. 25. The whiskey raisin bread and cream sandwich, a sweet goodbye for dessert. Irish immigrants baked whiskey-soaked raisin bread, slicing it thick and filling it with sweet cream. The whiskey raisin bread and cream sandwich was indulgent, festive, and often reserved for holidays. Each bite was rich with warmth, the whiskey and raisins giving depth to the soft cream. It was a reminder that even in poverty, joy found its way into kitchens. Today, it's almost entirely forgotten, a ghost of celebrations past. From fried potatoes and cabbage rolls to whiskey-glazed ham and raisin bread desserts, these 25 forgotten Irish-American sandwiches tell the story of a people who endured hardship, clung to tradition, and built new lives through food. They remind us that sandwiches are never just bread and filling. They are history, identity, and memory pressed between crusts. These creations may have vanished from menus, but their legacy remains in every story of resilience and reinvention. Tell me, which of these Irish-American sandwiches would you bring back first?